Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. I am heading out to a 2-day trade show in New York City shortly, so I'm going to try and keep this intro short. I will admit I am in sort of neurotic packing for work mode, which I haven't had to do for a year and a half, except for one occasion. The upside is I don't have to get on a plane or anything, just taking the ferry over from New Jersey to the city and back, because I'm actually staying in a hotel in New Jersey so I don't have to deal with New York City. It's a whole story. I'll fill you guys in on that at some point, maybe in the weekly email for this one. Anyway, I'm going to get to see a non-work pal or two during the trip, but it'll be mainly business meetings and schmoozing with my pharma people for about 7 or 8 hours a day, masked up. As I mentioned, I did one day of this sort of thing in Philadelphia in August, and my voice was totally shot by the afternoon. I was supposed to be there for 2 days, but at the end of day one, I was like, I can't speak anymore. I've seen everybody I need to see. I am getting the hell home. That said, I am hoping to pace myself this time, especially because I have to host an event at the end of day 2. So we'll work on that. Still, I have some general anxiety about just being around people, even though the trade show requires proof of vaccine, full mask mandate, and this will all probably be much easier and less chance of me being exposed to anything than, say, Saturday when I connected with a pal of mine in New York and then stupidly went walking down Prince Street, where it turns out every tourist in the world is back. Anyway, let's dive into this week's show. Our guest is the artist Zoe Beloff. Listener, Heath Killen, recommended I talk with Zoe back in the before time, spring of 2019. But I dropped the ball. We connected. She sent me a couple of books about her work, which are weird to describe, but we talk about them during the conversation, so you'll get it. And I did keep her in the great spreadsheet that knows all in one of my prospective guest sections, but I felt kind of like a heel not following up, later in 2019 before the world ended. So a few weeks ago, Zoe sent out a mailer, an email about a new exhibition and book she's got. So I figured it was high time we get together. She lives in New York City, so we got to do this one in person. So Zoe's new work is this massive history painting on cardboard called Parade of the Old New, after a line from Brecht. It's this chronicle of the Trump years, and I could talk about it, but Zoe's going to get into like the impetus, the construction of it, the history, the way she left and came back to it on numerous occasions, and all that stuff in just a few minutes. So I don't want to repeat anything she's going to say. But when I say massive, I mean this is like 140 feet long when all the cardboard panels are laid out in sequence. And it's a haunting piece. It's a reminder of, well, the quote unquote greatest hits of the previous administration, except, the worst hits. And it'll be on display soon, this full gigantic, I don't want to say tapestry because it's a different structure. It's made out of cardboard, but it'll be on display November 2nd to December 7th of 2021 for you time travelers in the audience at Gallery Treize in Paris. That's Treize. There'll be a link about it in the show notes for this one. But the upside is, in addition to this singular exhibition, you can also check out Parade of the Old New as a book, because Zoe managed to get the entire series of panels reproduced as a single 19-foot-long accordion book, and the print edition of this thing is just gorgeous to behold. And the other side of the book, the back of the panels, in other words, has this long essay by Zoe on history paintings, the controversies of rendering history and who gets to render it, what to do about those problematic Philip Guston paintings that got into some trouble last year, and a lot more. It's Parade of the Old New it's an amazing project. It's an amazing construction. The book is fantastic. There's a lot more I can tell you about it, but again, we're going to get into the roots of what it all means here. So this is just the latest project for Zoe. Her career goes back decades and covers a lot of different forms: painting, film, installation, picture stories, or cartooning, whatever we want to call it, and more. And when Heath connected us, I admit I was just kind of flummoxed as to where I'd even begin a conversation with Zoe. And she sent some books of her work, and I was just like, I don't understand what's real and what isn't. I don't have the vocabulary to talk about some of the conceptual things she was doing in film, but now that we had this peg of Parade of the Old New, this launch pad, it opened me up to her work and the conversation we have. It turns out I could have spent another hour or two talking with her about her films, about narrative modes in her work, and a lot of other topics. It's a conversation that I hope you'll really dig. And suffice to say, Zoe Beloff is a fascinating artist with a powerful new work out in Parade of the Old New. And I hope you'll check it out either in Paris or in the print edition, which is only available, and there'll be a link to this in the show notes, only available from a company called Booklyn, which is like Brooklyn, but without the R. There'll be a link to this. Like I say, it's not on Amazon. It's not on bookshop.org. You have to go out of your way to get this, but it's really worth it. Now, as caveats go, Zoe was drinking tea while we were talking, and so you hear the mug a couple of times. She also lives near the subway that runs below the Williamsburg Bridge, so that shows up in the background every so often, but you'll deal with it. Now, here is Zoe's bio. It's kind of extensive, but I figure it'll give you a clearer idea of who she is, rather than my skidding around the topic. Zoe is an artist, filmmaker, writer, and rootless cosmopolitan based in New York. She aims to make art that both entertains and provokes discussion. With a focus on social justice, she draws timelines between past and present to imagine a more egalitarian future. Her projects often involve a range of media, including films, drawings, and archival documents organized around a theme. They include proposals for new forms of community, the Coney Island Amateur Psychoanalytic Society and its Circle, 1926 to 1972, and the Days of the Commune, projects that explore relationships between labor, technology, and mental states in The Infernal Dream of Mutt and Jeff and Emotions Go to Work, as well as the exploration of the origins of cinema from a feminist perspective in Charming Augustine and Shadowland or Light from the Other Side. Many of her projects also go out into the world as books. A World Redrawn, Eisenstein and Brecht in Hollywood, which explores films they were never able to realize and how we think about them today. Most recently, she completed Parade of the Old New, an allegory of America in dark times, a panoramic painting reproduced as a 40-panel accordion book accompanied by her essay, The Troublemakers, History Painting in the Real World. Zoe's work has been featured in international exhibitions and screenings, including the Whitney Museum Biennial, Site Santa Fe, the MHKA Museum in Antwerp, and the Pompidou Center in Paris. However, she particularly enjoys working in alternative venues that are free and open to the community for events and conversations. These have included in New York City, the Coney Island Museum, Participant, Momenta, and the James Gallery at the CUNY Graduate Center. She is currently working on a documentary public art project, The Song of the Essential Worker, in collaboration with her longtime cinematographer and all-around partner in crime, Eric Musi. You can find more about her work from her website, zoebeloff.com. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Zoe Beloff. Well, we may as well start with Parade of the Old New. Tell me about the project, what it is, where it began, and where it's showing.
It began in January of 2017. We have to remember, we were going to protest at the inauguration, and I was painting these big like protest posters on cardboard, and because I I believe that protest should be festive and loud, and I want to be visually loud, but I felt like there was just not a space in something that you could hold with your hand to express my rage.
Yeah.
So I felt I needed a larger canvas, as it were. So I started large cardboard. Cardboard is actually a medium that I love. It's a proletarian medium. It's an everyday medium. It's a medium of protest posters, but also of like global shipping. It is the medium, ground of the 21st century. It seems really old-fashioned, but it really isn't. It's shelter for people who have to live on the street. As I say, it's like the boxes we get from Amazon. So I love cardboard. So I decided I would make a great painting in cardboard. And so I started with these cardboard panels. I just bought standard cardboard, 40 by 60 inches. And I started with the first 3, and it was kind of a terrible... It came from... The title comes from a poem by Bertolt Brecht that he wrote in 1938, and it's about this kind of inauguration of a tyrant, and he comes in a great procession, and he claimed, he and his henchmen are shouting about how they're the newest thing, but really they are old and their ideas are decrepit, and they've kind of risen from the dustbin of history. And I just felt it was like super appropriate. This Make America Great Again, just bring these really dragging with them these old racist, like horrible ideas. So that was kind of my inspiration behind it, and also the connection between kind of the racism of the Nazi era and what was happening today. I mean, I didn't realize how literal that would become a few months later. Yeah. I more thought of it as a metaphor. And I didn't want to paint it quickly. I realized I didn't want to paint it in a realistic way or in a kind of political cartoon way, but as a kind of dream allegory of America. And that's why, there's people as animals. They are monsters. They are hybrid people, animals. So it's the inauguration of this pig figure, and they're he's the dogs. He's led by these attack dogs, which is, on the one hand, it's Bannon. On the other hand, it's the ghost of Roy Cohn. That's why he's white. It's a ghost of Roy Cohn. And so I was kind of making these connections, like the Brecht poem, between past and present. And I actually stupidly had it led by the ghost of the Ku Klux Klan, which soon became not the ghost at all. I realized just kind of a literal figure. And... So I started these 3 panels, and I really didn't know where it would go or where it would show, but I felt it was important. And then I took it on as a task that I had to record the dark times. And I started with more panels. And I did this. The first 6, actually, they ended up being in an exhibition that was really interesting in Berlin in the Academie der Künste, and the exhibition was called Benjamin and Brecht Thinking in Extremes, and they're 2 of my most important. I would call them comrades. And what was great, it was a beautiful archival show about their friendship with original documents, like the work of art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Did you know it was written? It started on note paper that was advertising Perrier. Who knew? It's gorgeous.
Totally fitting.
Yeah.
But still.
But they invited a few contemporary artists to contribute. So I ended up, of course, overdoing it. So I made a film called Exile, in which I brought those people to New York today. And I also had the first 6 panels of Parade. And then off and on for the next 4 years, as things that really troubled me and really struck me occurred, I would go back to this painting, and it just got longer and longer. And I mean, there was 5 panels of the far right rally in Charlottesville, because I was just so devastated by it. And I was like, I cannot believe I'm making a picture with like Nordic heraldry in it. This is absurd. This is absurd in the 21st century. So it became this kind of task for me. And I mean, I think I naively thought people might be interested. Turned out not so much. But still, in a crazy way, I continued. And I continued all the way through till I decided...
I was going to say, you need to say persisted.
Yes, I persisted. Off and on, not continuously, but till I decided it would end when Trump was voted out of office. So November 2020. And it actually turned a corner for me, like visually, during the pandemic. So I came back to it like after a year during the pandemic, and something really changed. So it became, rather than, things out there, things that I personally like, the detention of children at the border, which in what can only be called concentration camps, to things that I was witnessing with my own eyes. So when I came back in the summer of 2020, I started to paint things that I saw, instead of like with pictures ripped from the headlines, it was pictures from my phone. So there were the workers and the ambulances and people outside our house lining up for food. I mean, it was just very distressing, but also just, I want to paint these people. I care about those people. Somebody should represent them in paintings, It's not just the 24-hour news cycle, and I felt quite strongly about that. I didn't care, and if it was good, if it had to be me, it would be me. So I felt it was important to do that. And then I painted, I thought it was going to end with this beautiful image of people painting the words Black Lives Matter on the streets, as people were doing. And I just thought that was like a beautiful public art project, and I wanted to end like this golden road, this new path, this new direction. So I thought I'd done all that, and by December 2020, I was like, phew. I mean, it must have been like 120 feet long at this point. I had it stacked all over my little studio. And I was like, okay, I've done this task. And then, of course, January 6th happened. And I was like, shit. I have to go more cardboard. I have to go and buy more cardboard. So I went back and I painted that. It was like, I imagined this, like, all you could think about when you saw that on the news and video, it was like a swarm. It was just like this mass, a swarm, like a swarm of insects swarming on the Capitol. So I painted it like the Capitol was being dive bombed by bats and frogs and flies, and just like, like swarming. So it became this.
You hoped a project with an end.
With an end. And so they did end, and that ended it. And then the last image is kind of like a little flame, the image of Amanda Gorman and her beautiful poem that she said at the inauguration. I felt like we couldn't end with a terrible thing. Like we have to have some kind of hope. So I did it, and I did feel a little bit like, sometimes like Brecht, when he was in Hollywood and he said he was writing for the desk drawer. Like, who knows whether anybody will look at this or go back to it or read it or what. But then I've been kind of thinking off and on, like, how to get it out into the world. Because I did not make it for myself. This is not just like my personal thing. It's like, it's not that kind of work. It's work that in us to be seen, I think. And I'd had this idea about possibly a book version. And then I think that converged in the fall of 2020. I heard two things. One was I heard that very few people at my university where I teach Queen's College had been applying for research grants. I guess because like everything was shut down, people couldn't travel, they couldn't go to libraries. So I was like, I could use that money. I could make an artist book. And I wrote this really impassioned proposal to put this project into book form. And on the reverse side, on one side would be the entire painting, and the other side would be this essay about history painting, which is something I'd actually been thinking about for quite some time. Like, it was in the back of my head, particularly because and particularly in the last few years when it's become such a kind of crazy charged subject and flaming debates. And I was like, this is something that is, in my world, is a parallel to some of the political things that are happening. And it's something I need to sit down and talk about. So I wrote this essay called The Troublemakers, History Painting in the Real World. And I'm really interested in what that is, how not a painting of the famous and the powerful, but how can ordinary people, like, how do they work through, how do we make another kind of social history painting, and how that's been tackled by artists really starting in the 19th century. And I mean, it's a huge subject, but I just launched into it.
Well, one of the things I thought was so interesting,
board.
One of the branches you go down is different ethnic groups having issues with how they're represented in history paintings, even when the history paintings are intended to show the horrible treatment of these various ethnicities. In this case, black people who were enslaved and Indians who were murdered as part of our manifest destiny. And that question of not who has the right to make art about X, Y, and Z, but you know, to me, it ties into, you know, what we're dealing with a lot of the trigger warning questions, what art is and isn't meant to, or I don't want to say permitted to do, because when you start putting permits and limits on things, you end up in a disaster state. But on the flip side, you end up with people deliberately inflicting harm on other people through the guise of art. Which raises the big question of, where do you feel your responsibility lies as an artist?
That's a really
It's way too broad, but still.
I think, and people have written angry letters to me. I mean, or emails, shall I say? I mean, I have been quite attacked already, which I guess I shouldn't be surprised. From actually completely opposite.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're going to find people on the far right who are pissed off at this
or
because you're showing America
two
is
sets
rotten.
Of people from the left.
Yeah.
Both, like, I mean, on the one hand, I mean, I just have to tell you this before I come to that bigger question. I think, well, on the one hand, for example, we're talking about the Arnautoff murals in the Washington High School in San Francisco, I think. That's what we're talking about. And there's been a lot of debate, should they be whitewashed over, because they show that, for example, he was tasked to do murals about the life of George Washington, and Viktor Arnautoff, who was a communist, Russian communist in the 1930s, and a student of Diego Rivera and so on, decided to show Washington as he really was, which included being a slave owner. So they showed black people working he showed black people working in his estate and all that kind of stuff. And also how, you know, this, a country, set out on the road of manifest destiny. Exactly. And some people have objected to that. They said children or young people, because it's a high school, should not have to walk past images of enslaved people. So these should be whitewashed over. And other people disagree, and that this is art. But also this really happened. Like, this is not, and it's like, do we only show the overcoming of oppression, or can we show oppression? I mean, these are really hard questions.
But it gets to the sub-question of who is we.
Right.
Because I think you'll hear people saying, you and I as white people aren't in the position to do that.
I've been told I've been on the side of death squads by saying, on the one hand, I've been told by a young Asian American curator that I'm on the side of death squads for saying that these images should exist. On the other hand, I got an enraged letter from a so-called Marxist who said that, and this is the second one I've got, about how I, for example, talk about the 1619 Project, which I think is really important, and that racism has nothing to do with anything, and class is everything, and I am just totally wrong. And he said I don't write as a white male heterosexual, but I do think it is my duty to critique you for your own benefit. And I was just like, whoa, let's unpack this. Yeah. Women and people of color have had hundreds of years of being told that it was white man's duty to critique you for your own benefit.
Of course. It's for your own good. We mansplain.
Exactly.
We man-judge.
It was just like all in one sentence. I was like, yes.
And you would find a reaction on the far right with how dare they show Washington, anything less than Jesus' son.
Right, I mean, I think so, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's, for me, there is no simple answer, because I don't want people to be hurt or feel less proud of themselves or any of those things. I mean, I thought a lot about my own background. I'm obviously not a person of color, but, I come from a refugee family. Supposing, I went to Germany and there were pictures of...
Yeah, well,
I'm getting there.
As we know, it's not Germany to worry about. And before my first business trip to Germany, I was talking to a Jewish scholar pal of mine and said, my family history, I'm first generation American, which carries a lot of connotations as a Jew, which we can talk about. But I said, I'm really uptight. He's like, Gil, it's not Germany. It's more like Poland and places where they pretend nothing happened.
Yes,
Germany at least has been dealing with it.
I mean, Germany's been great in so many ways, but can you imagine going to Munich and then there's a statue of Goebbels in the town square? Yeah. You would not, I mean, I could handle it, but I would not feel overly welcome.
It would set a different tone for you. Yeah.
It definitely would. Yeah. So, but I think we also cannot whitewash history, and either from the left or from the right. I think we have to say things like they are. Show things as they are and they really were. Like, create an honest picture, and just to, if they had just painted Washington, he had just painted Washington crossing the Delaware, everybody would have been fine, I think we have to show, in order to move forward, we cannot whitewash the past. I do feel that, and I think we need to talk about these things. And that's kind of why I came down on thinking that these paintings, which actually I think are very calm, they're not sober in a very Brechtian sense of that word, exist as a point which in a school setting we need to discuss. I think we need to talk. And as I say, just to pretend the past was not what it was is not actually very helpful. And we need to counter it with images of how things can be different. And I think that's where I would stand. And we're all in this together. And I'm wary about, well, you have no right to do this or that. Because once we get into rights, and people kept in their own lanes.
Permission for art. And
yes,
it's
I
a
think
slippery slope.
it makes me feel uncomfortable. Like, I'm only supposed to deal with my, women's issues or something like that. I think we all need to deal with everything. All of us. That's kind of how I feel. And
it's got to be immensely challenging.
Yeah.
In terms of...
Things aren't always comfortable, nor should they be comfortable.
Yeah,
Comfort is not always a good place to be, and that's also been about museums. Is it a place for comfort? Is it a place for people to get away from the real world? And which brings me to the other sore point, which I brought up in my essay, which is the paintings of Philip Guston, which I just recently saw again with my own eyes. It's a fantastic exhibition of all those troubled paintings.
Yeah, where are they?
They're at Hauser and Wirth, that bastion of capitalism, but they did bring these paintings together.
That's what you mean.
And they are knockout. I mean, just seeing them again in reality, partly just renewed my faith in painting. And everybody was there, and it was full of people looking and talking, and that's what art should be about. It's starting the conversation.
Is it that sense that the original museum is a publicly funded thing in part, and you take on that civic responsibility of, again, not offending anyone by having these, the Klan imagery that Guston,
But it's so disturbing and so strong. I mean, but we should all have forums to talk, that's, instead of putting things on a pedestal, how can a museum start this conversation saying, we realize this is troubling, but let's all talk about it rather than let's not show it because somebody...
Yeah. If we just deny the reality of it, that'll somehow make it better. I mean, honestly, I think it's the first time I've talked about it on the show, there's a no-fly list for me of guests I won't record with, tied to when Pan America had a debate over whether to celebrate the victims of the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris. Guys like Art Spiegelman and Neil Gaiman, Françoise Mouly, Art Spiegelman's wife, they, immediately said, yes, we need to celebrate. Huge petition not to honor those victims, signed by a lot of contemporary authors. And I just look over that list, I'm like, I'm sorry, if your belief is that the guys who suffered that, we shouldn't celebrate them and they kind of deserved it. Yeah, that's you're not coming on my show. Right. Not that any of you care, but that's the art was the art. Satire is a weird thing. France is a weird tradition, but you boil it all down, and it was people trying to kill Jews, and that's because of expression, you can't just decide you're going to pick and choose who's right and who isn't. I hope you weren't part of that, in which case we'll have to cancel. I'm just kidding.
Not at all. But it's interesting that this project is now gaining interest in Europe. I mean, I think in a way because Europe is a safe. I had been talking. How can I put it? This is just. When I started this project, I was in discussion with a wonderful young curator at the Jewish Museum in Paris who had invited me to do a show there. Mm-hmm. And I was very thrilled. She was so sweet. She took me out to lunch. I'd never met her. And we talked, and at the end of lunch, she said, by the way, I have to ask you, are you Jewish? And I said, it's okay, I am.
There's always well, with both of us, you don't look Jewish. It was always that, do I take that as a compliment or an insult? This is horrible.
You just had to ask, but it was all fine.
Yeah.
And so it was originally, we were talking about it being there. Yeah. And then she moved on to the Museum d'Art Moderne, and so the show collapsed. But then she invited it to a nonprofit art space in Paris with a couple of other young curators. And amazingly, COVID or not, we have actually managed to get it off the ground and going there. And like they got a grant from the city of Paris to bring this work to Paris, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. Yeah. So it's going to be in Paris, and then...
Have they been hanging it? Have you gotten to see pictures yet of it on display?
I'm going to Paris in 2 weeks, and we're going to put it up.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they've started yet or if they're waiting for you to...
Okay. Yeah, they're waiting for me.
Gotcha.
And just earlier than that, a wonderful curator I know from St. Petersburg in Russia was invited to do a show in Vienna, and there wasn't money or space because I was not the only artist in the show. There were other Russian artists. She was doing a show called, based on the famous line from Marx, first as tragedy, then as farce. Yeah. And she invited 4 artists, of which I was one. I was like thrilled to be part of a show called that. Yeah. And she was like, well, we must show this, but there's not enough space and blah, blah, blah. So I made a print version. So it's like 24 inches high and like 50 feet long in sections as a big print that you can put on the wall. Yeah. And it's been there. And then it's also, that is going to, then another one is going to Augsburg and Berlin, then it will go to St. Petersburg.
It's the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah.
That's right.
And here, I can't pay anybody to look at it.
Right.
I mean, I had an interesting experience where I reached out, it was kind of crazy, to the New York Historical Society, because I know they'd been interested in protest posters and once approached me, although nothing ever happened. And just out on a whim, I said, I'd love you to see this. And I had put some pictures up online. And a young conservator and a curator came in March. And this was in March, here. And we looked at it all in the living room. We had a very interesting discussion. And I never heard from them again.
Well, again, it was the time.
Yeah. We've talked to the Queen's Museum. So I think here, even that kind of rubs, people don't know, how would people take it? Maybe somebody would complain, Yeah. It's like, let's not go there and let's not ruffle a feather.
Yeah.
I also think partly it's people in the art world think of it as... think of the kind of work that I do, almost like children's book illustration. I have one foot, as you know, in like the world of picture storytelling and the graphic novel, and one in like art making, and that's a really weird boundary, And
yeah, we'll say it's all art, but
I think it's all art.
The forms that you work in are so varied.
The forms, sometimes it ends up as a book, as a picture story. Yeah. I always like Ben Couture's word picture story.
Yeah. I think that I've always hated graphic novel as a term. That's always just, as someone who was reading comic books since he was 3, I carry you don't have to dress it up. It's okay. And when Ben came up with picture story, that conveys everything you need. It's But what was it like seeing this reproduced small, seeing Parade of the Old New as a book instead of, the full size 40 by 60?
It's not, it's obviously not as powerful. But I was thrilled when I discovered that it was even possible to make an accordion book this long. Yeah. Do you realize this is 19
He says
foot
19
long?
feet, yeah.
It's crazy. And it's strong and it doesn't fall apart. And it was, quite honestly, I hate to say this, but it was made in China and at a price I could have, my grant covered.
Yeah.
So I was kind of thrilled at its unusual form and the fact that Lovely Brooklyn, which is a nonprofit arts organization that particularly distributes picture stories by artists concerned with social and environmental justice, they picked it up and it's been flying off the shelf. which makes me like super happy.
Where did
It's something people can have. I like to make things that at a price people can afford.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw it's I think $28. I'm like, that's actually, I've seen the limited, ridiculous price for things, and it's like, yeah, those are a little. It would be nice to have this, but or something like this I can actually foist off on friends also as a neat gift. Well, I would ask where art began for you, but first, where did your political sense or sense of justice, I suppose,
That's
begin?
a really interesting question, because I feel like ever since I was in art school in Scotland, we used to strike regularly to protest Margaret Thatcher. It was ridiculous. I mean, really, she would care?
You still had to make a statement,
But I think going to art school where there was a lot of working class students because, art school was like trade school. And so there was a lot of working class kids, and that was also kind of a political education. My mother, and just coming from the family that I come from, my mother was a German Jewish refugee, and I think that people like her really made connections between oppressed people who were Jews or black or whatever. I mean, we visited America when I was a child a couple of times in the 60s, and I remember we went one summer to the South in 1969. My father wanted to meet people at Duke University. He was also an academic, and my mother said to us, I was just a child, she said, when you see a black person walking down the street, you always want to step aside for them, because they had to step aside for white people for hundreds of years. And I took that very seriously. And I just saw like segregation with my own eyes. Like, even though I was a kid, it was like so obvious.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me. So I think I've always kind of been at that. All those things made me have a feeling of social justice. It was many decades later where I think it became manifested in my own work. Much later, I started to think about how in my own personal way, I could represent that, which has only been in the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. I think my work really addressed some issues. And I always want to address them. I always think art, it's not like, I don't like artists that scold.
Yeah.
I want to entertain, but also start discussions. I think those things are important to me. I mean, I think of my project, the Coney Island Amateur Psychoanalytic Society, as my first really kind of political work, but it was about the personal and the political, and how people can come together as a community and change, their inner lives and, fight in that way, like a kind of psychoanalytic equivalent of socialism. But it was also really funny and playful, and I felt very close to it. I mean, these were my folks. So I kind of make worlds and I live in them.
Yeah. How do you characterize the work before social justice,
work? I was doing work. I mean, in a way, there was aspects, because I was interested in stories. I was interested in talking about, I did a number of projects which actually dealt with the history of film and technology, but from the idea of lived experiences and stories that were never told.
Right. Because to me, that's all a through line for you. That's still the thread.
How the idea of mediumship kind of coincided with the origins of cinema, but it was also talking about these women who were kind of written out of history. So there are, I'm the same person, there are through lines, but I've just focused in different ways.
Mm-hmm. What did America mean to you when you were a kid? And what led to the decision to come here?
That's well, as I say, kind of coming, I think, from a Jewish family who my grandparents came from one place, my parents from somewhere else. I grew up in Scotland. I never felt like I belonged. I just felt really, even though I'm a white person, it might be hard for people to understand that. Like, I am sure I was the only Jewish kid in my whole school. And my mother said, never tell anyone, never say anything. And I always felt like it was this weird secret and I didn't belong and my name wasn't McPherson. And there was always a sense of discomfort of not belonging. I would never be and even when I was older, I would never be a Scottish artist. And you'd hear like casual anti-Semitism, like it was just part of the landscape. And it wasn't terrible. And I don't think my parents, because they were older and they were academics, realized what it meant for kids.
And given the scenario they were fleeing from,
right,
this anti-Semitism is not as bad as what we had back then.
And that's why I think my mother said, never tell anyone. It's nobody's business.
Yeah.
And I remember, this is like one of my weird traumatic memories of being 6 or 7. And some kid asked me at school, because I didn't go to Christmas prayers with, Christmas service with the minister. We weren't religious, but she drew a line in the sand. No Christmas service with ordained minister. You got
to have a bright line somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I had a feeling of, and I was asked and I just shook my head and I've always felt guilty that I denied who I was. But I was just a little kid, you know, and I didn't want to cause trouble. My mother said, never say.
Right.
And so I never felt like that was my home. I never felt like I was, Stalin called Jews rootless cosmopolitans, and I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, same thing. It's we are rootless. We are cosmopolitan.
So because my family moved, and there was a sense you could move, the way some people have lived for generations in a place, they don't really think. Like, to me, it was no big deal to move somewhere. When I was in art school, I knew I was going to leave Edinburgh for sure, and it was just a question of where to go. And I was a teenager. The kind of, I was listening to Patti Smith and, the Velvet Underground and looking at weird art in Art Forum. And it was like, New York seems cool. Like, I'll go there. And it's good sometimes to be naive and not see the difficulties.
Yeah.
I had a travel grant and I came to New York and I thought I'll go around to all the colleges and find out how I can study film. Because I studied art as an undergraduate because there wasn't I loved movies, but there was no way to study film. I had never met anybody who studied film. There was no film classes.
Right.
So I just would go to movies all the time. And I decided I didn't really want to do art because I didn't want to make nice paintings, for the mantelpieces of the Scottish bourgeoisie. I was I can draw quite well, but I want to make actually also something that was more for everybody. So I went around and I went to Columbia and they said that was one school where you didn't have to already have studied film to be a graduate film student. Like they would take you whatever you did. So I was like, fine, I'll apply to that. My parents thought it was completely bonkers. But I applied and by some terrible mistake, they let me in.
Little did they know.
And I went there. I arrived at 22 with a suitcase and a manual typewriter. And the great thing about New York in the early 80s, it was really cheap. It was really dangerous, but super cheap. And going to now I couldn't imagine someone doing that. Those schools are so expensive. But, I had work study, I had a scholarship. Rent was a couple of $100, I think it was $300 a month. And I ended up at 94.5 Greenwich Street, which was definitely something out of a Ben Catchor story. I came to, that's how I came to New York. And I realized I didn't want to be a Hollywood filmmaker like my classmates, but it set me off on some kind of adventure.
What did you get better at with the film work over the years and the technology involved in making film? The fact that we all have studio level cameras in our pockets now. How has film changed for you?
in some ways, I make films on the margins. We used to shoot 16mm film. I mean, I'm very lucky because my husband also has a background in film, and he's a really good cinematographer. So we work together. We're a team for the last 20 years. We've been making films together, and I've been writing and directing, and he's been shooting. And actually, for the first time now, it's our project. But we always work together, and he's my toughest critic in whatever I do, and that's kind of great actually, because I know he does not mince words. Yeah.
Doesn't have to worry about offending you or anything.
Exactly.
You're not going to fire him.
We've been through it all. But yeah, we work together. And because I teach film, I often have young people I can hire, so I don't, inexpensively, but I always pay people because everyone should get paid. I never want to take advantage of anybody, even if they're a student or just graduated. So yeah, we've always worked kind of small and taken advantage of, we've got a bunch of school equipment out there right now, And in a way, in the last 10 years, we've been doing more digital cinema cameras and stuff like that, which does allow you a kind of quality that's like, in the old days, you would have had to shoot 35mm film. I'm not an anti-digital person at all. I mean, we made our last film with the Arri Alexa Mini, and you can win an Oscar with a film shot with that camera. It's beautiful. But one thing I should say, in all my films and also my books, I'm a story scavenger. Yeah. I'm not like a novelist who comes up with stories from scratch. I find stories, whether it's stories of real people or just give me a scrap of film and a few old postcards and I find film. I mean, I used to go to the flea market every Sunday in the 90s to find film. And those films will tell you stories.
Yeah, where did that begin for you?
And I think of myself as, just kind of an antenna and a voice through which people speak, rather than kind of creating something totally from scratch. They're my partners.
In particular, the works you shared with me, it's that stretch of the 1920s to 1940s with Brecht and Eisenstein and Charlie Chaplin, Benjamin.
I think that's my era.
Why is that?
I really
when did you realize that was your time? And what is it about that time?
For a long time. And there's a lovely picture of Ben Shahn that used to be in my parents' house, actually. Who was, I think, because these were intellectuals. I think what really appeals to me is they were intellectuals, but they felt it was important to communicate with everyone, not just other intellectuals. But they had kind of a social spirit, and they believed they took working people seriously. It's like Benjamin, who did radio broadcasts for kids. So he could write his arcades project, but also think about communicating ideas with everyone in a way that they would understand. Brecht, had all these very sophisticated intellectual ideas, but he also he desired to communicate with everyone. He took people seriously. There wasn't, and I think too much now the art world is like it's an elite thing for people in the know. Yeah. And the idea of picturing working people, with the birth of abstract expressionism and kind of abstract art in the mid-20th century, something really changed. And that became a kind of elite art. And the idea that you draw people, well, that's just kind of like illustration and old-fashioned and...
But that era detested Warhol when he showed up because, God forbid, you're showing the world as people actually see it.
And now it's really to get back to figurative pictures of real people. There's the best artists, African American artists right now, I would think, are doing really great work that harks back to the working class people, like, Diego Rivera or Ben Shahn or all the people who were doing like murals, which I really love because they were to be for everyone.
Yeah, I was at the Jasper Johns 2 weekends ago, just when it opened at the Whitney, and it was I'll say mixed vibe I had, with it. I'm not an art historian by any means, and there was just work that I found absolutely impenetrable and other stuff that just resonated in ways that I took. And then there's the obvious, I started at the end chronologically and went all the way back to the flags and the maps at the beginning and thought, that's probably the right way to approach this. The stuff that's going to be accessible and resonate in an explicable way, get to that near the end, but deal with the tougher later and mortality driven stuff first, I guess. I know it doesn't fit in the AbX world at all. I mean, it was a response to that or reaction to that, but
I mean, I gave up making pictures, and then I missed it so much.
Yeah.
It was funny that I used to think well, I can draw, but I'm not that good, But, I make films. I'm not Sergei Eisenstein, but it didn't stop me. And I was first I thought, well, I can draw as my character Albert Grass. He wasn't really a professional artist. So I think I could be his hand, know. And that's really what got me started to make drawings again, that people and pictures that I exhibited. Was a Coney Island project. I mean, I would always draw myself. I would draw storyboards and whatever, but they were working drawings. And then I just really wanted to use it as a medium to tell my stories as well as making movies. And it was me and Albert Grass together.
Yeah, what were the, we'll say cartooning or picture story influences you had? I mean, we mentioned Ben Catcher.
Well, I mean, in the 80s, I was buying the Jewish Weekly Forward every week.
Just to get Julius Knippel?
Yeah, exactly.
I used to get it sent to me at college, late 80s, early 90s. My mom was sending the Forward.
I adored him, and I loved his New York. And so that was super important. And I mean, I was looking at what Art Spiegel was doing with those early Raw magazines, and I would just pore over them in St. Mark's bookstore,
Which is the second location of St. Mark's, is where my wife and I met for our first date.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I think it was the second location. It was the one just above St. Mark's Place, a half a block up from there. But,
yes.
Yeah.
A place to be seen. Absolutely.
We set up our time. We'll meet you at St. Mark's and we all look back from there. The store's long gone, but, at least we have our memories. But, anyway, so you're reading
very important. So those things were really important to me. And I now teach one class with a friend of mine in the art department, and the students do documentary graphic novels. So stories of their own life, but in picture story form. And we love this class. And I show them you stuff from actual graphic novels and Will Eisner and so on. What was that? The famous one? I show it a lot. Something of God.
Not a message from God. Yeah, I know the. Damn it!
We were talking about the tenement in the Bronx.
Yeah, I know. I'll mention it in the intro. I'll get the title, but yeah, it's. I almost got to meet him at a festival in '98, but. It was in Maryland. He lived down in Florida, and there was a hurricane coming, so he wasn't able to fly up. Otherwise, that would have been the,
So there's stuff like that, but also artists from...
A Contract with God.
Contract with God, exactly. But also artists like Charlotte Solomon and so on, who are artists, and... Jacob Lawrence, of course, because I think his work is totally picture stories.
Yeah.
So all kinds of people who sometimes people put in the fine art category. To me, it's no different. Right. It's all picture stories, and
that's all about ghettoization. It's always, they don't fit in this world, and we have to exclude these guys, and and then you realize it's art. You guys are all contributing to some greater discourse, I like to think. But the notion, and it comes up in a few books or a few pieces you've shared with me, is the unwritten books or the unmade movies, those art projects that like with Brecht, having 50 film treatments, only
Right.
one of which ever gets produced when he's in Hollywood. Do you have a great unmade project?
No,
Yeah.
I don't. Things just come to me, and then they grip me and they won't let go. I mean, sometimes things take a long time to kind of incubate. Like, it's a story not ready to be told.
Yeah.
But I'm not one of those people who are like, if I had $2 million, I don't think that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, like these strange little figures here was part of something I was doing. I was invited to do last summer in St. Petersburg, and it was like, the title had something to do with like little mutants and care, and I was thinking about bodies and psychoanalysis and how we don't fit together. And so I was working with these clothing patterns that for my book, which was about my grandmother who was a dressmaker, and there's something in there about garment workers and bodies and how we picture ourselves that is not yet fully fledged yet, but they're hanging out there,
Okay.
these figures, and one day they may be part of something larger than themselves. So things, kind of ideas float.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about the book about your mother and grandmother. You've had a productive pandemic. We'll put it that way. You've managed the murals and this second book. So.
The book, well, I think the Trump era really focused me thinking about refugees just because of this kind of hideous immigration.
I'll tell you, and as I mentioned, I'm first generation American. I was, the week after the inauguration in 2017, I was recording a podcast down in Pennsylvania, down in Philadelphia, and was driving home on Route 95, and I saw all the protests at Philly International Airport, because the immigration ban had just gone into effect a day or two before. And I thought, if I don't pull over and join this, my Jewish mother will never let me.
Yeah.
Child of refugee. Yeah. You have to. You have to make your voice, part of this whole thing. But sorry.
So I took that really seriously, and I didn't think it was enough just to do an art project. Mm-hmm. So I actually joined a group. As it happened, the only Jewish group I've ever joined of women, and we would go every 2 weeks to the immigration detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and we would meet with people who had no visitors, which was mainly actually people from Africa.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people from Central America and so on, but they were rounded up here. They all have families. I mean, that was also like incredibly distressing to see a room full of like families and little children, and because their dad had been like arrested by an ICE officer. I mean, that was appalling. But we would visit these African people. So it was a task, and I did that for several years until COVID hit and we can't visit anymore. So I think it's important to do practical things. Art is never enough. Art is not going to change the world. And that wasn't going to change the world, but it was something I could do.
You change people's lives individually.
Yeah. We would help them out. We would give them $20 so they could phone home. And sometimes you'd call their lawyer and just kind of egg them on a little bit when they needed it. So I wanted to do books about, picture stories about refugees, and in part because of who I am and where I come from, and my grandparents and my mother were all refugees from Hitler's Germany who, for one reason or another, ended up in London. But I didn't want to do, and I wanted to tell that story, but I didn't want it to be the first refugee story, because I don't believe that the Jews are special in that way. Yeah. We're just one group of people who are persecuted, but it's all the same, people who flee their countries for whatever, because they're hated for who they are. it's just the same. So I felt like I don't like feeling like we have some like special relation to that story. So my first book, Between Worlds: An Asylum Seeker in America, was about a man from Cameroon and his story. And I had been his visitor for quite a number of months, and we still kept in touch after he was lucky enough to get asylum and be reunited with his family. So I wanted to tell his story, but then as my second book, I wanted to tell the story of my grandparents and my mother. And this is not a special story. It's not a story of great heroism and, escape. And it's an everyday story, because that's what I believe in, like everyday stories. Not everybody is a hero, but just what everyday people have to do to survive and what it takes. And in kind of a great loving memory of them, I also just loved my grandparents' photographs. It was so interesting to me. So I asked my mother to tell the story, her story of her childhood. And about 6 years ago, when her memory was still good, she sat down, and for a couple of weeks, I just recorded for like half an hour at a time. I thought I'd have to prompt her, but she was like, she didn't want any questions. She was just going, know? And my grandparents had taken such beautiful photographs that I felt this was something I could do. And perhaps it would resonate with other people. And people can't say, this is what makes me crazy. People will look at that and they'll say, it's different today. Well, I want to show them it isn't different today. And my books together show that is not different today. In so many parts of the world. I mean, there's been, at no time since the Second World War has there been so many people fleeing for their lives from different countries. And just what they did, and that is as close as I will ever come to an autobiography. It's the people who made me, in some ways, who I am. Yeah. I mean, my grandmother was a dressmaker, and that's what she did to support herself when she was a refugee. But I learned from her what it was to be an artist. She couldn't be an artist in her world.
We'll put that in quotes.
Quotes, yes, air quotes there. But she was. She showed me, if you had an idea for something, you could just make it with what was ever around the house. And as a kid, I just would like literally sit at her feet. And so these are the people who taught me who I am. And it's something I could do, and I could. Fortunately, I'd scanned all the pictures, and then I would just kind of add it. I felt like I wanted to add some pictures of my own to give a little bit of sometimes an amplification or broader context. When people take snapshots, it's always of the happy times.
Yeah.
And in the 1930s in Germany, it was more and more not the happy times, and just to amplify that a little bit. I mean, but also just to put into context, like there's a beautiful picture, which is a double-page spread in the book, of my mother's class at school, and all the kids, and they're all like got funny faces, and it's just adorable. But that school was burned down in Kristallnacht. What happened to those kids? How many of them lived to tell? We don't know. I felt they deserve to be pictured.
Yeah, I thought the book, and I've only read it as PDF, you do that balance of the photos and your own illustrations and her text just beautifully. Reading it, I kept, not looking for clues exactly, but as you were saying, autobiographically, I could see those threads and elements that end up contributing to you and the sort of art that you ended up making. Was your family cool with you going into the arts?
Well,
you did go to art school, so I assume they had some.
Well,
I guess
it was interesting because I grew up. My parents loved art. I was very lucky, and so I was dragged around museums since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I think I realized about age 12 I wanted to be an artist, mostly because I realized that the art room was the only place where people didn't tell you what you had to do, and there was no right and wrong answer. And that was really
You figured that out at the age of 12? Jesus, that's tremendous.
So, like everything else, like, I had this sense. And I think I was often very lonely as a child. And for children, art is kind of a way to escape and go into your own world. And I think that was, when I think about it now, I was kind of a lonely child. And it was just this little world. And I had some talent. There's one of my favorite pictures in my book about my mother. It's just pictures of me at like age 2 or 3. I've got a pencil in my hand. I'm like grasping it. And I clearly have something on my mind. Like, I am at work.
Yes, this is very serious business.
Yes. I'm grasping with my little fist. When I decided, I was really unhappy at school. I just did not fit in a school environment. I mean, this was Scotland. It was an all-girls school, and it was just stultifying. And I finally, at 16, I said, I'm quitting. But I decided to educate myself, and I found out there was an art class I could take at community college. So instead of finishing high school, I went to community college and hung out in the art room. And I decided to go to art school. My parents were like, even though they loved art, it wasn't really what they had in mind. My mother thought it'd be really nice if I worked in a museum. Like, I think in a way that was her dream job. She always said if it weren't for Hitler, she would have gone into art publishing in Leipzig, which was the center before Hitler of art publishing. And that's what she thought of as like a job in the arts, was kind of on the other side, not like getting your hands dirty.
Art adjacent.
Yes. And that would be lovely. I'd work in a museum and I would be a conservator or something and I'd get paid. Being an artist was absurd,
That's usually the parents' interest. Not that they're anti-art, but that they're worried about your ability to make a living.
Future and make a living and all that kind of stuff. And so why don't I do art history? So we fought about it. And it was also in Scotland in that time, to go to art school, you wouldn't even get a degree because it was really considered not an academic thing. It was like trade school. It really was. And so they wanted me to get a degree, not a diploma. And so we fought, and we ended up compromising, and I did like what here would be called a double major. So I was at the university studying art history, and I was at the art college, doing life drawing. And it was all utterly old-fashioned, but at least I did get to do it.
Nice. And they get to see your work in a way that, they appreciated what you ended up
I think my mother was a great believer in institutional success. So I think when I did well, she was thrilled that I was in the Whitney Biennial.
Okay.
Because
that's confirmation or
confirmation,
validation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas I was very stubborn, and I remember I was ballsy. I mean, it was kind of crazy. When I was in art school, in my last year of art school, I decided I wanted to go to film school. And I decided I didn't want to paint paintings anymore. I wanted to take photographs and make films. And I got into a world of trouble. And the head of the art college called me into his office several times, and he was telling me the Scottish Education Department is paying you to paint. So why are you not painting? And I had this crazy idea that artists should never compromise and do what they really want. So I was taking photographs, and I found this one teacher who had a film camera, and me and a couple of friends were making films. We just off our own bat. And if I hadn't got accepted to... so they were going to fail me. They were just going to fail me. I didn't...
You're not painting, you suck. Yeah.
So, fortunately, I got into Columbia, and they'd never had a student go to grad school in New York.
All of a sudden, they're celebrating you.
Yeah, exactly. Overnight, somebody, this is our student who is... I mean, I got away by the skin of my teeth. But I couldn't imagine being like that now. I think that got knocked out of me. But not totally.
I was going to say, you still have a sense of rebellion, and
I hope so. Like, don't tell me what to do.
You have a stubborn enough streak to make the parade of the old new.
Yeah.
You've maybe you rediscovered it in the last 4 years or 5 years now.
So, that was my
artistic upbringing. Yeah. So, who you're reading, which is always something I warn guests about normally, but I figure in this case I'll just pounce on you.
I'm looking at books. I'm just starting to actually really read a book that I was just looking at called Fish Story by Alan Sakula, who's a photographer, and he took he's interested in kind of the understory, the social story behind the global supply chain. Yeah. So he spent a lot of time photographing on container ships and so on, and kind of the...
Very timely right now.
Yeah. And I've been kind of interested, but I now have gotten very interested, in part because Eric and I are working on this new project we call a documentary public art project, to celebrate essential workers. And it will be posters and which will be like large scale.
Is it tied to the work behind you over there? Okay, because I'm wondering, all the people have QR codes beneath them also, so I assumed there was going to be a public...
I wanted to ultimately do a mural.
Yeah.
And that was like my grant proposal for doing a mural, and it would be life-size portraits of essential workers, and underneath each person would be a QR code, which would link to a documentary film portrait of them.
Interesting. Good.
And I spent all summer kind of like seeing if I could get some money together to do this, and I felt like it needs to be done. It grew out of the end of the old new, where I was filming like people, the ambulance workers or people distributing food and all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted to talk about those people and give them a voice. I mean, literally, a documentary interview portraits I keep saying it's about you, what you want to talk about.
Right.
And so amazingly, we got some money. I mean, not a ton, but definitely enough to get started. And we have started, and at first we're like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find 10 workers. Now I've got too many. We've got too many. I was going to say,
there's going to be a lot of them.
We've gotten, we were actually, this week, we were interviewing a longshoreman in the Red Hook container terminals, which is kind of amazing. So we're very interested in the circulation of people and things. These are like kind of larger stories that come out of that. And so I really want to go and kind of dig deeper into like Alan Sakula's work.
I'll put it this way. I am enthralled by your creative flow. Just how much you've got going on and the level of productivity, especially given, this whole situation we're in the middle of. The idea that you're creating this is great.
I think this project, honestly, for me, comes out of like the COVID era, where I was just working alone here in the apartment. And Eric and I used to, like, every late afternoon, we would walk in the East River Park, and we would watch the ships and the barges, and we would but we were so isolated. Now, like, we can go out. I want to talk to everybody, And we talked to our UPS delivery person. She's in it. And, tamale makers, and a little guy who sharpens knives and mends shoes in Chinatown. We've talked to people in languages we do not speak. We get help and translators, and but and these people who had to work through the pandemic, they want to be heard.
This is, I said it on the show numerous times over the last year and a half. If you insist on calling them essential workers and frontline workers as though they're in a war, they are going to take that seriously at some point. We're seeing it now with employment, warping the way it is. Like you don't tell people they're essential because you want to go hide and have somebody else deliver your groceries and you're afraid to go out. at some point the bill's going to come
Yeah.
due, and they're going to understand they have value and their lives matter and their time matters. And it's, seeing how that's playing out, again, statistically across employment, but also seeing them as individuals as you're doing now has got to be really, I would say fascinating, but just, this idea.
I am learning so much.
Yeah.
And one thing I will tell you, if it weren't for recent immigrants, New York City would collapse. Yeah. You don't know how many people we're interviewing who come from somewhere else.
Yeah. And within the last first generation.
First generation,
just
yes.
Gotten here.
Yeah. And as I say, that's another whole thing. I mean, ultimately we're talking about the possibility of making it all into one longer film, which is not so much just for them to speak, but to kind of dig into more essayistic, to dig into some of these things that come to us and kind of amplify these ideas.
I will come back when you have that ready. We will sit down and record again.
But these portraits is too much to do, and everybody is so beautiful. I'll show you pictures in a moment, but everybody's so interesting looking. I'm super excited to paint them.
Again, I can't wait to see it all. Zoe, thanks so much for coming on. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you. I've probably talked your ear off.
And that was Zoe Beloff. Her new book and exhibition are Parade of the Old New. The cardboard panoramic history painting will be on display at that Galerie Treize, Treize, in Paris from November 2nd to December 7th of 2021. And you can get a copy of the accordion book version only at Booklyn, Booklyn. It's a beautiful production, and when you unfold the entire accordion, it's 19 feet long, and it all holds together. Structurally, it's a well-printed, well-made book. And as I mentioned, the other side of the book features a neat essay from Zoe, The Troublemakers, History Painting in the Real World. But as I mentioned, Parade of the Old New is only available at Booklyn, so there will be a link to that in the show and episode notes for this one. No going to Amazon or bookshop.org or wherever else you look. It's only through this site. And you can also follow Zoe on her website, zoebeloff.com, and on Instagram at Zoe Beloff, all one word. In both cases, that's ZOEBELOFF. You should check out her site because it's got links to a lot of her art, drawings, books, film. You could see some of the movies. There are links to them there, as well as interviews with her and other tangential connections to Zoe and the incredible work she's made over the years. And we didn't get to talk enough about the films this time, but I'm hoping we get to sit down again sometime soon. The upside, and it's a project we talk about near the end, she has a lovely new book called Reminiscences of a Refugee that I'm not sure about the printing or the publishing timeline for it, but I got to read a PDF of it, and Zoe showed me some page proofs during my visit. So let's hope sometime next year we'll be able to get together again. Now, you can support the Virtual Memory Show by telling other people about it. You can also support it by telling me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie, TV show, book, music, art exhibition, piece of theater, whatever you think I should check out and that I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by postcard, letter, email, carrier pigeon, or by leaving me a message at my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail. You don't have to worry about me picking it up. You can leave a message up to 3 minutes long. Tell me if it's cool to use your message in an upcoming episode, because sometimes I want to do that. And I won't do it without your permission. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. My day job treats me just fine. I'm doing okay. But there are a lot of individuals and institutions who could use your help. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding sources. There are people who need help with medical bills, with artistic projects, with other things in their life that you might be able to help them with. And when it comes to institutions, you could look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, election funds. There are a lot of different ways that you can help try to build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.